back to the Wisdom by Harry YouTube channel. My name is Harry.
And I'm Mary. We're so excited to have you here today for another fascinating episode. Today we're diving deep into the complexities of international relations. You know how it is. It's this intricate dance of energy, diplomacy, and unfortunately, sometimes conflict. And we've got a really interesting case study to unpack today. We're going to be looking at this phone call between former U.S. President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
This one's got layers.
It really does. We're going to be focusing specifically on what's been reported about their discussions surrounding Ukraine's power plants and these efforts to reach a ceasefire. So, get ready to untangle some threads with us. We'll break down the key points of this call, look at it from different angles, and explore what it all could mean in the bigger picture.
Sounds good.
Now, right off the bat, the timing of this call is interesting. It happened just a day after Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Makes you wonder, right?
Oh, absolutely. The sequence of those conversations is definitely something to think about. Could be connected.
And then you have Zelensky coming out after his call with Trump, expressing hope for lasting peace this year under Trump's leadership. That's a pretty strong statement.
It is, especially when you consider the backdrop here. Remember, this call comes after what was described as a pretty tense exchange between them during Zelensky's White House visit just a month earlier.
Right. It was their first conversation since that meeting, so a lot of baggage there.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer to how we interpret things.
And then, of course, you have all these ongoing efforts to try and get a ceasefire in place. There have been these meetings in Saudi Arabia involving international teams, and even a proposal for a 30-day ceasefire was floated.
And if you remember, Putin actually shot down that widespread ceasefire idea when he spoke to Trump the day before.
Exactly. So where does that leave Zelensky? It seems like he was open to at least a partial ceasefire, specifically focusing on halting attacks on critical infrastructure, things like power plants, railway lines, and ports.
That's interesting, a partial ceasefire. I mean, it makes sense to protect civilian infrastructure, but does it really address the core of the conflict?
Right. And Zelensky seemed to know that this kind of agreement would be fragile. He even warned that if Russia violated it, Ukraine would retaliate. There's a quote where he says, "Everything will fly," referring to drones and missiles.
So he's definitely not backing down.
No, not at all. But then you have Trump taking to social media, talking about aligning Ukraine and Russia in terms of their requests and needs. He even said ceasefire efforts were on track.
That's a pretty optimistic spin, considering everything else going on.
It is. Okay, so let's talk about the elephant in the room, Ukraine's power plants. The White House initially said that possible U.S. ownership was discussed.
Yeah, that was a big one. If true, it would raise a ton of questions about national sovereignty, security, you name it. But Zelensky clarified things later.
He did. He said the discussion was actually only about the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, which is currently under Russian control. Big difference.
Huge. And we got some more context from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He said Trump offered U.S. help in running those plants with our expertise. Rubio even went so far as to say that American ownership would be the best way to protect them and support Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
So essentially framing it as a security measure, but it's crucial to remember Zelensky's clarification.
Absolutely. He confirmed that power plants were discussed, but specifically only Zaporizhzhia. That suggests maybe the initial information wasn't totally accurate.
Right. So beyond the ceasefire and the power plant issue, what else was on the agenda for this hour-long call? Well, Rubio also mentioned that Trump agreed to help Ukraine get more air defense systems, particularly from Europe.
That's significant. Could really bolster their defenses.
Absolutely. And there was this agreement for both sides to share information closely between their defense staffs as the situation on the ground changes. So continued cooperation there.
Interesting. You know, it seems like things have calmed down a bit since that tense meeting at the White House.
Yeah. Back then, Trump was telling Zelensky he wasn't thankful enough, and even suggested he was gambling with World War III. Things were rough.
And remember, the U.S. temporarily stopped military aid and intelligence sharing after that meeting. But then things started to improve, and they reached a ceasefire agreement on March 11th. So maybe some progress after all.
Maybe. Now, let's bring Putin back into the picture. When he talked to Trump the day before the Zelensky call, he apparently agreed to stop attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. But there was a catch.
A big one. He said a full ceasefire would only happen if Ukraine's allies stopped providing military support.
Which, of course, they've refused to do. So a complete ceasefire is a no-go for now.
It really highlights how tough it is to find a solution when everyone has different goals.
And despite all this talk of ceasefires and agreements, things are still really volatile on the ground. Just hours after these calls, both sides were reportedly attacking again. Kyiv said hospitals were hit, and Russia reported a drone attack on an oil depot.
Yeah. It's a stark reminder that things can change really quickly. Diplomatic progress doesn't always translate to peace on the ground.
Sadly, no. But there was at least one positive development. Ukraine and Russia did a prisoner exchange, with each side releasing 175 prisoners of war.
That's good news, at least.
Yeah, Zelensky called it one of the largest exchanges and said Russia even released 22 severely wounded Ukrainian soldiers. But still, it makes you think about the human cost of this conflict.
It does. And it's worth noting that Zelensky believes Putin won't agree to a full ceasefire as long as Ukrainian troops are in Russia's Kursk region. Remember, there was that surprise attack there last August.
Right. Lots of mistrust and territorial disputes complicating things.
For sure. And then you have this weird situation with attacks on energy infrastructure.
Yeah.
Both Zelensky and Putin have said they'd stop them, but then they both accuse each other of continuing them.
It's confusing. Are they not sticking to their word, or are they just interpreting things differently? Who knows?
Good question. And to wrap things up, there's a report about technical teams from Ukraine and the U.S. meeting in Saudi Arabia soon.
So more practical level discussions going on in parallel with the high level stuff.
Exactly.
So there you have it. This phone call between Trump and Zelensky, it's just one piece of a very complicated puzzle. We've got potential ceasefires, questions about Ukraine's power plants, and a conflict that just keeps going.
What really stands out to me is the contrast in perspectives, not just between the leaders themselves, but even in the public statements afterward. It's unclear what the path to peace looks like.
And that brings us to the big question for all of you listening. What do you see as the biggest roadblock to a lasting resolution in this conflict? We've heard about partial ceasefires, possible U.S. involvement, and a whole lot of disagreement. What needs to happen for things to finally change? Think about it. There's a lot to unpack here.
Definitely a lot to think about.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another complex issue to unravel.
See you then.
Bye for now.